Welcome, everyone, to the Presidencies of the United States. I'm your host, Jerry Landry. This is a special episode on our new special series, A Seat at the Table. Basically, in this series, we will be looking at a cabinet member beginning with the Washington presidency and going forward from there, being able to take some time to highlight some figures that we've talked about in the podcast, but maybe weren't able to do more of a deep dive into. And for this series, I'm actually going to be joined by special guests. And our special guests today are Rob and Jamie from Totalis Rankium. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
So glad y'all are here. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this special series. Before we get started, I wanted to give y'all a moment. I know that we've got a number of listeners from presidencies who are also Totalis Rankium fans, but for those who may not have found your podcast yet, tell us a little bit about Totalis Rankium.
Well, we are a podcast where I'm doing well so far. We rank people totalisly, and we rank presidents. We also rank emperors, but I think the presidents is more linked to your podcast. So let's focus on that. We have been ranking every single president from Washington, and we're going to go all the way up to sort of Biden, depending how far through his presidency he has got by the time we finish.
If he survives.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Anything could happen, Jamie. Anything. And we'll cover that. So, yeah, we sort the... we go through the biography of the presidents, and then we put them into rounds, and we judge them using an arbitrary scoring system that everyone fully agrees with when we publish the episodes.
Not subjective at all.
No, yeah, it's great.
Well, and that's why I knew y'all would be great guests for this series, because we are actually going to do a little bit of ranking at the end of this.
Yes,
we'll get to that. But also, I saw that you're doing a new series for Patreon on the Founding Fathers.
We are in the process of setting that up. I'm very excited by it. Approximately 5 years ago, I decided I really wanted to do an episode on Hamilton, and I've been trying to figure out a way ever since. So, we are going to look at Founding Fathers. So we'll be looking at the likes of Hamilton, likes of Burr. We can have a look at Franklin, who we had to completely skip over. All the interesting characters. Well, I'm not sure how strict we're going to be when we say Founding Fathers. It might just be anyone who was around roughly at the time who sounded interesting. We're going to do that. They're going to be multiple part episodes. It's not going to be a set 2 episodes. So they'll run as long as they need to run to cover the details of the life.
And the great thing is we're basing on Hamilton. We'll do it in an R&B style, which is
that Hamilton episode will all be musical.
Yeah.
Jamie has been practicing his hip hop.
Yeah. Yo.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely look forward to hearing that. And I figured that Hamilton was going to be a part of that series. So I deliberately did not choose Hamilton for us to do for this episode.
Oh, you see, the thing is, listeners, Jerry has not told us who we're doing.
No.
So I'm really interested. I thought it might be Hamilton just because, Hamilton's a good choice to start, but it's not. So who's it going to be? Oh, are you ready to tell us yet?
I am ready to reveal. Our subject today is going to be Henry Knox.
Ooh, sexy Knox.
He knocks on doors and breaks down patriarchy. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Great. No, I'm pleased with that. Knox is a good one.
And I was trying to remember how much you covered on Knox in the Washington episode. I couldn't remember.
He was mentioned once or twice, wasn't he?
Okay, you're testing me now because this was... how long ago did we do Washington?
Let's listen to the entire Washington episode and we'll know.
I think it's about 4 years ago now. But if I remember correctly, he was mentioned a couple of times. We decided that he didn't wear his top very often and had lots of muscles. And I think that's the only thing we decided about him, which is, I also know, not true. But we decided it was.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to put us on the right track.
Well, I look forward to it. And having done the notes for this, we've got some interesting things to talk about. So let's just get started. And that's the thing. Henry Knox really doesn't get much of a spotlight. So I'm looking forward to having a chance to really examine him. And then at the end, taking some time to talk about his impact and what he brought to the table. So just to get us started, he was born on July 25th, 1750 to William and Mary Knox. His parents were Ulster Scots who came to the U.S. in 1729.
Does that mean they're from, when you say Ulster, to us that means Irish, and they say Scots, that means Scottish. Is that both?
Yes. So it's also referred to as Scots-Irish here. And they had a number of folks who would go to Ulster and then come to the colonies at that point.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually where I live in the Charlotte area, we have a good sizable Scots-Irish community here. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so his father was a shipbuilder. Unfortunately, he suffered a financial downturn and he left his family and went to St. Eustatius, which is an island in the Caribbean. Unfortunately, he passed away there in 1762. So at this point, Henry Knox was 12 years old.
Oh.
But growing up, he actually studied at the Boston Latin School, and he learned Greek, Latin, European history, and arithmetic.
See, it still amazes me how, even though the colonies are so far away, they're still learning Greek and Latin because they're still the classical languages. It's
well, they've got to do the
the high five. Yeah,
the high five whenever they make a Latin reference.
They were obsessed. They were obsessed with the classical world back then. They really were.
So, unfortunately, when his father died, he actually had to leave school to clerk at a bookstore in order to earn money for his mother. And the owner of the store became like a surrogate father for young Henry, and he encouraged his love of reading. He even allowed him to take home books from the store in order to read. And so Henry used this opportunity to teach himself French as well as advanced mathematics.
That is, how is that possible? In fact, you can take a book and just learn advanced maths. Surely that shows a level of intelligence that I'm not really used to.
No internet.
No internet, yes. No Google.
And that helps. They didn't have too much to do. So advanced mathematics, it was their equivalent of Twitter.
Yeah.
But one of the things that he was really interested in was warfare and ancient battles. And so we'll see kind of as his career goes, he really draws on that and goes into the military career. But before that, he was actually a member of a street gang when he was younger.
Nice.
Did they have tattoos?
I'm assuming they had tattoos.
Oh.
So when he wasn't, learning advanced mathematics, he was out with the gang.
Yeah.
Typical childhood, really, isn't it?
Do you think it was a maths gang? It's like algebra versus calculus kind of thing.
Probably. I mean, those two sides can get violent.
Yeah, well, definitely, yeah.
They got really wild with the maths. But when he was 18, so, that love of warfare and battles, he opted to serve in a local artillery company called the Train. And so at this point, Boston was really becoming a rather volatile place. This was when the tensions were starting to build. Henry actually witnessed the Boston Massacre in 1770. But despite his interest in war, he actually tried to convince the British soldiers to return to their quarters during the Boston Massacre in order to avoid conflict. So, it's interesting, even at this young age, he's getting involved in things that, would ultimately lead to the American Revolution.
Do you think he had that view because he'd been studying it for so long, he had such an interest in it? It's like, this isn't the way to do it, sort of thing.
Exactly.
The Boston Tea Party is really fascinating. But you get the impression that if you were there, you probably would not have thought that it would resonate through history quite as much as it did. It's one of those sort of scuffly things, and yes, it's bad, and what's going on. I'm not convinced he would have been thinking of grand visions of history whilst witnessing that.
And it's funny that you mentioned that because we don't know if he participated in the Boston Tea Party, but he was a lookout prior to the Boston Tea Party. He was a lookout to make sure that no tea was unloaded from one of the ships that was involved. So again, a witness to something that would eventually, but like you said, Rob, I don't think at the time they necessarily knew where this would lead to. But it's still fascinating to think that, here he was at this young age witnessing events that we would be talking about for centuries.
Yeah, but Boston was the place to be at that time.
Absolutely.
It's even worse for him because he's a massive tea fan as well. So
a lot of people were massive tea fans back then. Yeah, they were.
There must have been people that, stored it. They got a few bags off the ship. So I'm gonna save this. This is going south, kind of thing.
just in case. Just in case tea.
Yeah.
Well, and especially he would need tea because in 1771 he actually opened up his own bookstore, and with that he stocked up on books on military science. Surprise, surprise, from his interest in warfare.
Yeah.
And he actually used the opportunity because at the time, there were many British soldiers in Boston. So he used the opportunity to talk to them about the military.
That's quite nice. It's like getting a first-hand account.
Exactly. And he started to put this knowledge into practice. In 1772, he co-founded the Boston Grenadier Corps, and he became its second in command. Now, around this time, he suffered a setback. The day before his 23rd birthday, he went out hunting, and he accidentally discharged a gun, which shot off 2 fingers from his left hand.
That's not good.
Nasty.
You should never put your fingers in front of the barrel.
No, not a good idea.
No. That's your first lesson right there.
First lesson about warfare. That is not where your hand goes.
He obviously is not reading those books.
He shot off 2 fingers.
He shot off 2 fingers.
Was it at the same time, or did he accidentally shoot off 1 finger and then later on that day, oops, it's happened again?
As far as I know, it was at the same time. But
right.
Let's hope.
That sinking feeling after you've lost the second finger. It's like, oh, not again.
And so he was out hunting, so he had to try and bandage it up as best as possible and get to a doctor, and the doctor sewed up the wound.
Ooh.
And so, at this point, it took him some time to recover, and he was very self-conscious about the wound. I mean, as you would be, because,
Well, he can only count to 3, so...
That's really going to scupper his advanced mathematics.
Yeah, exactly.
As well, if he can't use his fingers to count anymore.
Exactly. Well, and somebody asked, well, how were you wounded? Well, I shot them off myself. But he was so self-conscious about the wound that he practiced wrapping a handkerchief around it so that it wouldn't be noticeable. And apparently, for the rest of his life, even when he sat for portraits, he would have a handkerchief on his left hand.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So surely, if you're rich enough, though, and famous enough, you just say, just paint in a couple of extra digits, and it'll be fine.
Exactly.
Just imagine what they were like.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the other 3 and imagine 2 more.
Exactly. It's so weird, though, because all the portraits have 3 thumbs, but it's fine.
But, he did come back from this, and he ended up in 1774 getting married to Lucy Fluker.
Oh.
So him and Lucy fell in love. Unfortunately, Lucy's father objected to the marriage. Lucy's father was more of a loyalist, and so due to their differing political views, he really wasn't happy about them getting married, but they went ahead and did it anyway. Mm. And Lucy's brother actually tried to convince Knox to serve in the British Army. Her brother was serving in the Army. Knox, of course, declined.
Yeah.
And he would go on, and shortly after they got married, we have the battles of Lexington and Concord in April 1775. But in terms of his relationship with Lucy, the two would ultimately have 3 children, although only one lived to adulthood. So
it's typical of the time, isn't it?
Unfortunately, child mortality was a reality for them. This is such a massive time. So much going on, as they're starting their marriage with the battles of Lexington and Concord and things really heating up in the Boston area. Henry and Lucy had to flee the city. And unfortunately, his bookshop was looted and his stock was either stolen or destroyed. And so that was his exit from the bookshop business.
Yeah.
he instead went into service. And he actually directed the cannon fire against the British in the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Oh, really?
So he's starting to put that military knowledge and warfare. He realized, let's point the cannons at
in the right direction.
My hand.
Yeah, he learned by this point.
I was going to say, how was he selected to be in charge of the cannons? Was it just a case of, you look book smart and like you can tell which direction the enemy's in?
And honestly, I think it pretty much was that. Oh, this is a guy who knows mathematics. He knows about warfare. Sure, let's put you in charge of the cannons.
Yeah, makes sense. Desperate times.
Yeah.
And so shortly after this, General George Washington, who y'all know quite well, took command of the Continental Army. And although Knox didn't have a commission at the time, he did still work with Washington and the other generals. But he did end up getting a commission, fellow Massachusettsian.
That's a word. It's
citizen
fine.
of Massachusetts. John Adams lobbied the Second Continental Congress and got Knox commissioned as a colonel of the artillery regiment. And so, at this point, we're at the Siege of Boston, and the Continental Army needs more cannons. Now, they knew that Forts Ticonderoga and Crown Point had been taken in upstate New York and that they had some cannons there. That was 300 miles away.
Oh.
And, General Washington and the other generals were saying around, well, what do we do? How can we get those cannons here?
Because back then you didn't have cars. You can't just drive there and
didn't have roads.
No roads. No.
It was this we were about to hit. So I'm going to stay silent. We're about to hit the one moment that Knox appeared in our episode.
Oh, okay.
So I remember this part. So I'll let you listen.
Okay. So no limousines. Carry on.
No limousine. But Knox, with his gumption, was like, I can do that. I can bring him.
On his back.
I'm assuming. Well, just pile them on. Come on, guys, we can do this. We can do this. We can muster through. So he took an expedition, and despite the obstacles that were presented by icy rivers and snow-filled mountains, over the course of 6 weeks, he brings these cannons to Boston. He arrives and delivers them to Washington on January 27th, 1776. And his route is actually marked today by the Henry Knox Trail. Oh, and it's a trail that runs through New York and Massachusetts.
I was going to say, in January as well, the weather's not going to be very clement, is it? It's going to be a bit bad.
But somehow Knox did it.
That's amazing.
And this was the part in the Washington episode where you speculated he came swaggering into the camp with no top on, showing his rippling muscles with a big cannon over his shoulder.
Yeah.
Here's your cannon.
Here you go, lads. Plug this.
Yeah.
And so these cannon were pivotal to the Siege of Boston. So again, we have Henry Knox, even at this early point in his career, making a sizable impact.
Yeah.
So after this point, he goes to work on improving defenses in Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York City. He stays with Washington and his army through the New York and New Jersey campaigns in 1776, 1777. He established an armory at Springfield, Massachusetts, which was key to American efforts during the war. Now, there was an attempt by Congress to supplant Knox as the head of the artillery. But, at this point, he had established this great reputation. I mean, the cannons alone, come on.
Yeah.
And so Knox, along with Generals Nathaniel Greene and John Sullivan, threatened to resign if Knox was removed as head of the artillery. And so Congress did some thinking, and they're like, okay, he can stay. It's fine.
Good.
It's fine. So now, while he did take part in key battles, such as Brandywine and Monmouth, one of Knox's key contributions at this time was the establishment of the Continental Army's first school for artillery and officer training. And he trained over 1,000 soldiers with this, and it was the precursor to the U.S. Military Academy, which is better known as West Point.
Heard of West Point.
Mm-hmm.
Does that start at like kindergarten level, then sort of work their way up?
We've got to start them early with the advanced mathematics.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
We've come across West Point a few times in our podcast.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so like a well-known.
We are going to come across West Point again in our next episode.
Okay.
Little teaser for you there. We're about to do Eisenhower.
I like Ike.
Yeah.
And for listeners, I'm actually wearing my I Like Ike t-shirt. So
Nice.
deliberately, because I knew Eisenhower was coming up next on Totality. But back to Knox. So, he's playing this pivotal role in building up the military establishment. And that's the thing. Through Knox's career, you see this commitment to a professional army, really trying to make a force that was well-trained and well-provisioned.
Which I'm guessing really went against the grain of a lot of people at the time. Because
exactly,
a lot of people at the time really resented the idea or were nervous about the idea of a professional army that could do things such as oppress the people.
Exactly. And we'll see that more as we get further into his career. He would come up against this opposition time and time again, this idea that a professional army could threaten the nation, could threaten liberties. And he was like, but we have to defend ourselves.
Yeah.
We've got to defend ourselves. How are we going to do it? So he becomes one of these voices that is really pushing for a professional army. So for his efforts, Knox was actually promoted to Major General in March 1782, and he became the Army's youngest general. But as the war was wrapping up and Knox was involved with negotiations with the British for prisoners exchange, and he also worked with the Continental Congress and the Secretary at War, Benjamin Lincoln, about pensions and overdue compensation for the troops. So while all this was going on, unfortunately, Knox suffered a personal loss. His 9-month-old son passed away.
Oh,
and
no.
He was pretty devastated for a bit.
Yeah, it's going to crush you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he still soldiered on. And so when Congress began to demobilize the Continental Army, Washington awarded Knox with the day-to-day command for the remainder of the army. And that shows just how much Washington trusted Knox, that he would hand over command to this youngest general in the army.
Yeah.
And with Washington's resignation as commander-in-chief, Knox then went on to become the senior officer of the army. But he wouldn't remain in this position for long because Benjamin Lincoln, the Secretary at War, resigned, and it was recommended to Congress that Knox fill that position. Unfortunately, Congress didn't really think that they needed the position. So they pushed for a plan to have a standing militia force in lieu of a peacetime standing army. So again, we're getting to that, let's get away from a professional army. Let's just really focus on militia troops, the citizen soldiers. And with that, if you don't have an army, why do you need a secretary to run the army?
Yeah.
And so naturally, Knox was very frustrated at this, and he ended up resigning his commission in early 1784. He went back to Massachusetts, where he established a home in Dorchester. And at this time, he started to sort through some land holdings in Maine, including some land that had been confiscated from his loyalist in-laws, so Lucy's side of the family. He really started, and again, we see this numerous times, this land speculation, trying to use land for wealth. Knox was a part of that as well. But eventually, Congress realized, well, we really do need a secretary, and we do need at least some standing army-ish. So they came back to Knox and said, would you be the secretary? And he was like, okay, let's do it.
Fair enough.
So he was appointed Secretary at War on March 8th, 1785. And I do say this, the title at the time was Secretary at War, even though they were at peace.
Nice.
The Secretary at War.
Gets a sense of urgency. Yeah.
Do you think Knox fully understood what that meant? Was he putting on armor and go, right, I need to fight them, I'm at war? Or is he kind of like, no, I get it, I understand the role?
And he probably needed the armor for Congress.
But fair enough. Yeah.
With his fights with them.
Defenseless, yeah.
But part of the reason why Congress was starting to see a need for at least some type of standing army, was at the time frontier conflicts with native peoples were on the rise. And so they authorized a ramp up of a 700-man army in 1785. But this army, it's 700 people. That's a fraction of the folks that the army had during the Revolutionary War. So, how much were they really going to be able to achieve? And Knox struggled with recruitment and with management. He only had 2 people that were helping him manage the War Department.
Wow.
So, it was really a struggle to be able to make anything with Congress giving him so little to work with.
Do you know where they were based at this time?
So at this time, I'm pretty sure it was still Philadelphia. With the troops, they were mostly in what became the Northwest Territories, so the American Midwest now.
Yeah.
That was really their focus. But Knox would probably be back in Philadelphia running things with Congress.
Probably half out of a hotel room, as everything was quite slapdash at that time. I do love hearing the origins of these, what would become these huge, huge systems like the War Department, and just imagining back when it was just 3
Two
people.
men in a pub.
Yeah, just trying to make it work against all the political opposition. Yeah.
I mean, at this point, the Pentagon was just a drawing on a piece of paper.
It was a doodle that Knox was doing while someone was talking to him.
So, what shape's that? I think it's a 5-sided shape. Pentagon? Yes! That'll do.
We'll have one of those. So Knox, is struggling with making anything work with this. So he ended up coming up with a proposal. He proposed an army that was primarily composed of state militia with reforms to the militia system. So at the time, the militia systems there really weren't standard. So you had some folks that were well equipped and well trained, but mostly folks were, well, we don't really have weapons. Let's just, I guess we can march around for a few minutes, but yeah, let's just get drunk. Come on.
It's been part of the army, right?
Yeah. It's bonding. You've got to build up those relationships.
It's a character building.
Yeah, definitely.
And Knox was like, okay, that's a recipe for disaster. People are going to be shooting off their fingers. I've heard that happens sometimes. So let's really get a system going here. Again, Congress initially rejected this proposal, and he wanted a military academy. He had sponsored that during the Revolutionary War. Congress rejected that as well. We don't want training. We don't want a professional army.
So what, for context reasons, why was the government so against that national army?
So part of it is that they thought that this would become a new aristocracy, and an armed aristocracy that could potentially, take away everybody's freedoms and liberties and establish, a monarchy or whatever. There was this big fear about liberties being violated if there was this standing army.
The British had a standing army.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be like them.
No. Good Lord, no. Gosh.
Anything that the British did. No, we don't want to do that.
Yeah, fair enough.
But things are continuing to get worse for the Confederation government. So at this point, we have Shays' Rebellion in Western Massachusetts in 1786. This was an armed domestic uprising, protesting about taxation. And with these increased tensions, Congress is starting to, well, maybe we do need some kind of force. We don't want a big one. Maybe we need a few folks.
Just enough to put down some farmers if they cause some problems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm just hoping somebody turned up with I've got an idea for a banner. It's got like a massive crown on it. Like, no, absolutely not.
You're essentially talking about John Adams.
Yeah, John Adams. Bless him.
So at this point, they end up having the Constitutional Convention. Knox wasn't involved in that, but he did play a role in it because George Washington was reluctant to participate. And as you saw on your episode on Washington always had his image in mind. And he was really concerned about, well, what if this fails? What if it doesn't work? How is this going to impact my image and what I'm able to do? But Knox convinces him, and Knox actually responded to him when Washington asked him, should he attend? Knox responded, quote, "It would be a circumstance highly honorable to your fame in the judgment of the present and future ages, and double entitle you to the glorious epithet, Father of your country." And so, here we can see Knox knows how to get to Washington. He knows what motivates him.
You're going to struggle not to turn up after someone says that to you.
Exactly. Yeah. And so Washington says, okay, I'm going. They have the Constitutional Convention. Constitution was ratified.
Short version.
Washington becomes the first president. And so now we have the new government under the Constitution with Washington at its head as the first president. When he assumed control over what was the executive branch, there were actually only two departments that were holdovers from the Confederation government. So the Department of Foreign Affairs and Knox's Department of War. So that means he also inherited Knox as part of this new transition. Now, Congress, when Congress convenes, they start to think, okay, well, maybe we need to come up with new executive departments. Maybe we can reorganize things a little bit. And so they established the new War Department, and Washington has a decision to make, who should head the War Department. Oh, wait, there's this guy, Knox. He's been around for a bit. He knows what's going on. And so he decides to keep Knox at the War Department. He sends his nomination to the Senate, and it's accepted without question. So now we have Knox as Secretary of War. He assumed the office on September 12th, 1789.
Around 10,000 BCE, families and tribes of the ancestors to the people of Britain would arrive in the southern part of the island after crossing from land that bridged from Europe. The Welsh built houses, communities, kingdoms, and continued to survive through Romans, Saxons, Danes, and Normans. The language and culture influenced by these sources continued to change and thrive, becoming ancient and modern at the same time. Join me as we travel through the history, meeting the kings, queens, nobles, and everyday people that create and grew modern Wales from the seeds of the ancient past. Croeso, and welcome to the Welsh History Podcast.
Now, with this new War Department, in addition to running the army, Knox and the War Department, they were also responsible for negotiations with native nations. And so Knox is involved with a few notable treaties because Washington's policy, and Knox was fully in support of this policy, was that instead of just rushing in and forcing native peoples off of land, we need to negotiate with them. We need to try and find a peaceful solution. So he is involved with the Treaty of New York in 1790, with the Muskogee, who are also referred to as the Creek. And this was actually one of the few that was actually signed on the eastern seaboard, not on the frontier. Yeah. It was signed in New York City, which was the capital city at the time. He was involved with the Treaty of Holston, which was in 1792 with the Cherokee. And this established the terms of relations between the U.S. and the Cherokee moving forward. It stated that the Cherokee people were under the protection of the United States, and that the U.S. would manage future foreign relations for the Cherokee.
See, initially that sounds quite nice, doesn't it? It's like quite a nice proposal.
But we know how that ends up, and not so well. And we will talk about that towards the end. So he also was involved in a treaty with the Iroquois in 1794, which affirmed land rights in upstate New York, and the Treaty of Greenville in 1795, which we'll get back to in just a moment. So while Knox and the federal government recognized that the lands that the native peoples occupied were theirs, so they were actually, they saw them as being held by the native peoples, despite the Treaty of Paris, which basically said all this land is now the U.S., even though they try for, well, let's negotiate land rights and let's negotiate this, on the ground, numerous tactics were taken by agents of and negotiators for the U.S. government to persuade Native peoples to come to terms favorable to the U.S. So even in this process, there's some shady stuff going on. And that's definitely something that we do need to consider when looking at Knox's legacy. But I did want to note this quote from Knox biographer Mark Poles. He wrote, quote, Knox held the rights of Indians to be equal with those of white settlers and demanded that crimes committed against the tribes be punished. So Knox did express his concern over the future of Native peoples. And he asserted that, quote, our modes have been more destructive to the Indian natives than the conduct of the conquerors of Mexico and Peru.
That's quite self-aware, isn't it? It's pretty good.
Yes. Yes. So, that's definitely important to consider. And this was a large portion of Knox's work at the War Department. Now, even though they had these treaties that they were negotiating, they also had war, what's been dubbed the Northwest Indian War. So basically, this was in the Northwest Territory, which is now, again, the American Midwest. Knox's time would really be focused on what was going on in the Northwest Territory, which had been created under the Confederation government initially. And the federal government planned to use the land sales in this territory to raise revenue, but they had to get things more settled on the frontier before they could do that and have settlers come. So prior to Washington's inauguration, the territorial governor, Arthur St. Clair, negotiated the Treaty of Fort Harmar. Now, in this treaty, the native signatories agreed to relinquish control of certain lands, which could then be opened up for white settlement. So again, we're talking about, let's don't just rush in and take the land. Let's negotiate things.
Makes sense.
The problem with this, and again, we get to those shady land deals. Many native leaders had not been invited to the negotiations, or some had said, you know what, we really don't want to give up our land, so no, we're not going to negotiate. But St. Clair insisted, you know what, we had a few folks show up, they signed, so it applies to everybody.
Of course it does. Of course it does. This person here looks vaguely similar to all the other people, so obviously their word must mean that they all agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So naturally, the native peoples were not too pleased about this.
Well, you wouldn't be, would you?
You wouldn't be. People are trying to take your home, your land. So a loose confederacy comes together and bands together to defend their lands. Now, to go ahead and quell these hostile parties, General Josiah Harmar was put in charge of a force of around 1,500 militiamen that was sent into the region, and they were soundly defeated in October 1790. Out of these 1,500 men, 129 were killed and 94 were wounded. It was an absolute disaster. And once news came back to the Eastern Seaboard and to the capital, the administration, including Knox, were criticized. This was the worst defeat of U.S. forces by Native peoples to that point. But wait, there's more.
Hey.
So things continued to increase tensions in the Northwest Territory. So they decide, let's put together another force. Let's put St. Clair into command. St. Clair had been a general during the Revolutionary War. So he's already there. He kind of got us into this mess. So let's go ahead and put him in charge of a new force.
He can sort it out.
He can sort it out. Surely he could sort it out. So he led around 1,000 troops, and this was a mixture of enlisted troops as well as militia forces, into a battle near the headwaters of the Wabash River on November 4th, 1791. Yeah, this one was even worse than Harmar's defeat. It's so bad. It was so bad that the battle is most commonly referred to as St. Clair's defeat.
Oh, yeah.
Of the 1,000 soldiers under his command, 632 were killed or captured.
Wow.
264 were wounded. And at the time, with army forces, they typically had followers, like camp followers, washer people, families, sometimes ladies to provide comfort to the men.
Mm-hmm.
The 200 to 250 camp followers that were with this group were not spared. 24 of them were killed and 13 were wounded. So this is an absolute defeat. And Washington and Knox, when they get the news, of course, they are just, what do we do? And so they put their heads together. Okay, let's really think this through. At this point, they had really been leaning on the commanders in the field. They've been, okay, we'll trust you. Whatever you say goes. And after St. Clair's defeat, they decide, let's do something different.
We should probably take more of a direct role in this.
Yeah.
I'd tell them what to do, maybe.
No one's using the word micromanage, but...
But here's the list.
Here's the list. Do not deviate from it at all. So they go to Congress and they say, look, okay, we've had this small force. It got defeated. We had another small force. They got defeated. We need more troops. We need an actual sizable enlisted force. We need professionals.
Let's not use a small force next time.
and not just, guys who, okay, well, you look like you can hold a gun. Here you go.
Yeah. Wrong way, Eric. Turn it around.
You could lose a finger.
Do not put your hand in front of the barrel.
That doesn't help. It doesn't look cool. I have 3 thumbs to prove it.
So out of this defeat and this rethinking was born the Legion of the United States, which was a force of over 5,000 men. And Andrew Linkletter described this force as follows, quote, "The creation of the Legion of the United States remains a high point of military innovation in the country's history. This force was designed for the particular needs of fighting on the North American continent, but organized according to the most sophisticated European thinking on how best to use the 3 different arms of infantry, artillery, and cavalry. Henry Knox was largely responsible for the concept, and in recommending the Legion to the president, he cited both classical authorities, and probably did a high five at that,
Definitely.
and 18th century experts. So, here we really see Knox's training come into play. He's like, this is what we really need to do if we're going to do this right. And we need to use the knowledge that we've got. We need to use the
he knew his Scipio. He knew his Hannibal. I mean, what more do you need?
Exactly.
In the 1790s. That's all you need.
That's all you need.
Yeah.
But so this new force that Knox organizes was placed under the command of Major General Mad Anthony Wayne.
That's not a positive precursor to his name, I'll be honest.
I have a feeling you said that exact same thing.
I probably did. Mad Anthony? Oh no. He's twitchy. He's still twitching. No, we can't order elephants. But Hannibal said no.
But, Mad Anthony, he is one of those characters, and he served under Washington in the Revolutionary War. And so with a name like Mad Anthony, Washington did take a moment and he was like, okay, do we really want this guy? But Knox was like, okay, look, I'll vouch for him. He's cool. He can do this. So, Washington gives in. Okay, we'll go with Mad Anthony.
I mean, it was a toss-up between Mad Anthony and Psychopathic Steve. So maybe Mad Anthony was the way forward.
Probably.
He was the way to go.
Because Psychopath Steve just stood there instead. He didn't do anything.
Very unnerving.
And especially at this point, they want action. So, but the thing was, Wayne, along with Knox, he was in that line of thinking, we need to really prepare before we just go marching. So
we need.
I mean, imagine that.
Yeah.
Let's train the soldiers.
We need a plan. Ooh,
I've got this mad idea. So Wayne, even though there was pressure, political pressure on the administration, okay, we need to have something happen. Wayne was like, no, we need to prepare. So it takes him a couple of years to build up the force. But when the Legion of the United States goes into action in the Battle of Fallen Timbers on August 20th, 1794, the battle lasted just over 1 hour, and there were low casualty numbers. But basically, this decimated the native Confederacy and their forces. It was a decisive victory for the U.S. It finally changed how things were going in the Northwest Territory. And after the battle, Native leaders were brought back to negotiations, which resulted in the Treaty of Greenville in 1795. And that established a firm boundary between what was Native lands and those that were open to American settlement.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm feeling a bit of mixed emotions about that victory.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, yeah, US, but also...
Exactly. Well, and that's the thing from our standpoint, we know where this goes.
Yeah.
And we know this was not a good thing for the Native peoples in terms of their time and seeing things from the United States perspective. This was celebrated as a victory. But again, this is the continuation of Native peoples being forced further west off of land that had been theirs for generations. So when we get to the scoring, I think that's a conversation to have.
Yeah.
So that was really, between this focus on the Northwest Territory, that consumed a great deal of Knox's time as Secretary of War, but also he was a part of the political battles that were going on at the time. So as y'all discussed in the Washington episode, Washington brought together this team of rivals, so to speak, and especially with Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton.
Someone should write a story about that. It was quite gripping stuff.
You could even turn into a musical.
You could.
So.
Exactly. And so Knox, when they got to these cabinet discussions and, Jefferson was arguing one way, Hamilton was arguing the other, Knox tended to go with Hamilton. And increasingly he turned more towards the Federalist cause, as these factions were being formed. He was especially key in the debate over whether the U.S. should remain neutral in the war between Great Britain and France. So, at this point, France had launched the French Revolution had started, but they had the French Revolutionary Wars that were going on. Knox supported Hamilton's position on the matter, and it helped to strengthen Hamilton's position in the debate, and ultimately the U.S. maintained a strict neutrality in spite of previous treaties that had been signed with France, pledging to come to their aid if they went to war. So Hamilton said that, okay, they've had the revolution, the king is gone, the monarchy is abolished. Our treaties were really with the monarchy, not with the state of France.
They were thrilled about that.
Which is just ingenious.
Oh, yes.
It really is. It's like when we said we would protect France, what we meant was their version of France that's no longer there. Can we say that? Can we get away with that? I think we can get away with that. That's fine, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. I'm king.
I mean, we had a revolution and established a republic, but we'll defend monarchy.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I still think they made the right call. The US at the time could not have got dragged in. It was so fragile. The start of their political system. No one at the time, in their wildest imagination, probably would have guessed where the United States ended up a mere couple of hundred years later. And at that time, it was too fragile. I understand why they didn't get involved, but at the same time, ooh.
Not a good way to establish a good reputation.
No, it's really not.
Yeah, well, we'll abide by this treaty, except when we don't want to.
Yeah.
But yes, exactly. And we've kind of already seen that, and especially with this focus on the War Department, militarily, the U.S. was not in a position to get involved. At this point, there wasn't really a Navy to speak of. which we'll talk about in just a second, it was still, to your point, Rob, I think that it was really the best decision and possibly the only decision that they can make. But it also leaves this ambiguity, and that would cause problems moving down the road, because especially like the Washington administration wanted to keep relations going with the revolutionary government after saying, oh, well, we're not going to help you and abide by this treaty. And that causes problems.
It's a very difficult situation when you're trying to start a new country and you've got Britain and France, the two giants, and you're essentially a nothing country because you only just exist. It's how do you keep both happy? You've got to keep relations going, ideally with the winning side.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And unfortunately, the winning side, Britain, have a bit of a bee in their bonnet about the whole
yes,
independence thing.
Yeah.
It's that whole revolution.
Yeah. We still haven't got over that, by the way, just saying.
No, you should have seen 4th of July in this country the other week. Oof.
Day of shame. We call it the Day of Shame.
That's what we call it.
Yeah. We all wear black.
But yeah, I know we're focusing on Knox, but you really do need to give credit to the early government that they were able to navigate these waters. It was a very tricky time.
Absolutely. And especially like Knox's role in this and really pushing for, he was really pushing this idea of a professional army. But in that, he realized that, he needed to think about the militia. He needed to think about the Navy. And so he was responsible for implementing the Militia Act of 1792, which gave the president the authority to call out state militias to serve the nation. So as part of that, Knox did an evaluation of the readiness of the various militias, and he found that only 20% of militia forces were capable of arming themselves at their own expense.
Oh, dear.
So when you're trying to lean on militia forces that have no weapons, that's a problem.
Could you get the idea that a lot of militias was like drunk guys at the bar just go, yeah, I'll fight. I've got a pitchfork.
Basically. And Knox was like, yeah, that's just not going to work. So he went ahead and proposed that the federal government increase their purchase of imported weapons, as well as establish facilities for the domestic production and stockpiling of weapons. So again, at this point, we've got the war between Great Britain and France. Importing weapons can be a challenge. So he's like, why don't we build them here? Until we can, let's import as many as we can, but let's really get domestic production up.
Makes sense.
And with that, he, of course, proposed, well, if we're going to make weapons here, we don't need to just turn around and sell them to somebody else. Let's go ahead and ban the export of domestically produced weapons. And Congress did act on his recommendation. So finally, Congress is starting to come around to this idea that, we really do need to think about establishing a defense of the nation and make it professional.
Yeah, that's an interesting twist, because you get there's a balance of, well, we kind of need to keep our import coming a lot, or export. Sorry, we need that cash and that flow, but actually we do need to defend ourselves as well.
Exactly,
it's like a nice realization.
Exactly. And Knox, another thing that he proposed, because at this point the U.S. was starting to do more trading, and that was part of the neutrality proclamation. We wanted to continue to trade with Great Britain and France, not have to pick one or the other. But the problem was, there were fights on the high seas. American shipping would get involved in that. So there was an increased need for protection on the high seas. So Knox recommended the creation of a U.S. Navy and also the establishment of coastal fortifications for national defense.
Baywatch.
David Hasselhoff. We had to import him.
This is your uniform. Red little thing. What? I ain't wearing that.
That was a key part of the Naval Act of 1794, along with the establishment, the construction of the first 6 frigates that would become the beginning of the U.S. Navy. So with this, there's one really big piece of Knox's career that we need to talk about as we're drawing towards the end of his time in the cabinet, and that's the Whiskey Rebellion.
What?
Oh, have you forgotten, Jamie?
How can you rebel against whiskey?
We had to skim over the Whiskey Rebellion in our episode because there was too much to talk about, and it disappointed you at the time.
Yeah. Tell us more.
So with this, part of Alexander Hamilton's plan for getting the finances of the nation back in order included a tax on whiskey. Now, at the time...
Sorry, Jamie's face.
Why would you do such a thing?
I have a feeling Hamilton is going to be losing points in his episode.
He's on 0.
And that's exactly what people in Western Pennsylvania and the West were thinking, because they depended on whiskey, not just for drinking, although they did plenty of that.
Yeah.
But basically because it was hard at that point to transport, goods and crops and things like that. So they would distill into whiskey, because whiskey in bottles was easier to transport than the crops that the whiskey was made from. And so it became, and especially at this time, this was a time before we had paper money like we have it nowadays. It really, folks relied on specie, which was, actual gold or silver. But in the West, they didn't have that. And so whiskey became a pseudo currency because everybody knew what the price of whiskey was. And so, okay, well, I'll give you 5 bottles for that cow.
Yes. The whiskey standard.
Of course I'll paint your house as long as you let me drink that bottle of whiskey. Yeah.
That we should do all transactions with whiskey now.
Oh, we totally should. Could you imagine? It would be so good.
Oh my God. Imagine teaching.
But I don't think you should be allowed to hoard it. You've got to drink what you're spending.
Straight away.
That's how it should be.
Because we don't want the price of whiskey, the value of whiskey, to inflate. We want to keep it in circulation.
You don't want people to stockpile it, so you gotta get rid of it immediately. Yeah.
So that's true with gold. It hangs around too much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, the folks in the West were really upset. It ended up in Western Pennsylvania. They started the Whiskey Rebellion. This was a domestic insurgency. So to combat that, Washington had to call up the militia forces. So he had to put into effect the Militia Act to get forces to march to Western Pennsylvania. Now, when it came time to do this, Washington looked around and he was like, has anybody seen Knox? So Knox was not in Philadelphia at the time. He had actually
drunk.
he was enjoying a little whiskey.
Yeah.
No, so he had actually requested some time away in order to deal with some personal matters, and he had land in Maine, in what's now Maine. At that point, it was still a part of Massachusetts. So he was away from the capital. Well, Washington sent word to Knox, hey, we've got some problems in Western Pennsylvania. You're the Secretary of War. I really need you to come back now. Knox did not come back quickly. He delayed. And Washington kept sending word to him. Washington kept getting more upset. And finally, Washington said, you know what? Forget it. Hamilton, you're on. Take charge of the War Department. Let's go and deal with the Whiskey Rebellion. So we really get a sense at this time, and reading some of Washington's letters, that he was really disappointed at Knox. He, up until this point, Knox had been a trusted subordinate for decades. They had a strong relationship. He'd always been able to count on Knox. But the problem was, Knox at this point had been heading the War Department for nearly 10 years. And the demands were increasing. now with the Naval Act, there was no Naval Department. So the War Department was responsible for building the naval frigates. They were increasing the size of the forces in order to deal with things in the Northwest Territory. There was just so much more to do than at any previous point in his career. And so Knox at this point is just exhausted. He's got personal matters that he wants to deal with. He needs to deal with his finances because, and again, like at the time, we see numerous public officials who, because they're so involved and away from their homes and dealing with the public business, their personal affairs, their personal finances go, completely in shatters, and they have to take time to actually deal with matters at home. So Knox finally says in late December 1794, he finally shows up in Philadelphia and he's like, look, I need to go. I need to resign. And it didn't really come as much of a surprise to Washington because he had been seeing how things were going. He had actually started approaching replacement candidates at the beginning of the year, like even before the whole Whiskey Rebellion and that fiasco.
Oh, right.
He had started approaching folks about, I may have a vacancy in the cabinet soon. Would you be interested?
So if you don't mind, sorry, if you don't mind asking, did Washington replace Knox with Hamilton before he resigned?
Yes. So Hamilton was just kind of in an acting role, taking charge of the War Department while Knox was away. But, he didn't end up becoming Secretary of War, but
he had fingers in pies, did Hamilton.
And as you'll learn more about in the Hamilton episode, he really liked dealing with every department.
Yeah.
he wasn't just staying with the Treasury.
That explains the new department for R&B that sprung up just after.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. So on December 31st, 1794, after 10 years in charge of the War Department, Knox finally left office and he ended his tenure as the first Secretary of War. So after this, Knox really gets to his own business. He settles on his land in Maine. He builds a 3-story mansion named Montpelier, which was also James Madison's Montpelier, but this was the northern Montpelier. He focused on business matters such as cattle farming, shipbuilding, brickmaking, and frontier real estate speculations, just like everybody did at the time. We see at this point in his life, he started to get into conflicts over the years because rather than dealing with folks who rented his lands, and so that was one of the ways that he made money, he would rent out his lands to folks. Instead of dealing with them directly, he'd send intermediaries to confront folks. He didn't want to deal with it. He didn't want to be the bad guy. But these intermediaries were not always the most pleasant folks. And so Knox starts to get a bad reputation in the communities. And apparently a group of folks who rented from him at one point threatened to burn his house down. That's how upset they were at him. They didn't, but they at least threatened to.
They lit a few matches while he's standing outside, like, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Very, very burnable, that house you're in there.
Yeah.
Be a shame if
this
very dry wood.
Something happened. But Knox did have one point where he was potentially going to go back into military service. So, during his tenure in the cabinet, tensions with France were heating up, and it ended up when John Adams became president, the quasi-war started. There was never a declaration of war with France, but it was looking like we were getting closer and closer to war. There were actually naval battles.
So roughly how old is Knox at the moment?
That's weird. I was literally thinking that same question about 30 seconds ago.
We're in sync.
Yeah.
So at this point, he was in his late 40s.
Oh, right. So he's managed to do a lot of this quite young then.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so Congress decides, okay, if we're going to war with France, we need to up our game in terms of our military. And we need to bring somebody back who is a rallying force for the nation. So Washington was brought back. At this point, he was retired. He was commissioned as commander-in-chief of the Army in 1798. Now, the problem with this, so as he was going to be building this new force, they needed to get some new generals under him to kind of be subordinates. And so Knox was one of the folks that was being looked at as being one of the 3 new generals that were being created.
Experience.
Except that even though Congress and John Adams, the president, thought that Knox was more experienced and technically was higher on the officers list, so he was a higher rank than Hamilton, and so Knox should be the second in command. Washington was like, no, I want Hamilton as my second in command.
Ooh.
Yes. So
pesky Hamilton.
Damn you, Hamilton.
Knox was not too pleased with this. And so he wrote to Washington basically saying, look,
check out my rhymes.
This Hamilton guy, he's great at R&B and he's got the musical going, but he's not really he's never really been in command like this. You really need somebody who you can trust.
It's a logical point to make.
Logical point. Washington said, no, Hamilton is my guy, and you can either like it or not. I don't care.
Is that because Washington probably trusted Hamilton more after the whole middle finger? Yeah.
Exactly. He, at this point, he didn't feel how trustworthy Knox was.
Yeah.
And so he knows that Hamilton will do the job. So Knox sent this letter to Washington, and I mean, you can tell just how upset he was at this. He wrote, quote, "For more than 20 years, I must have been acting under a perfect delusion. Conscious myself of entertaining for you a sincere, active, and invariable friendship, I easily believed it was reciprocal. Nay, more, I flattered myself with your esteem and respect in a military point of view. But I find that others, greatly my juniors in rank, have been, upon a scale of comparison, preferred before me."
Ouch.
Yeah. He's like, dude, we've been through so much together, and I thought we were friends. I thought you respected me, and this is how you're going to treat me. And so ultimately Knox said, if I've got to be under Hamilton, no, I'm not going to accept the new commission. So he doesn't go into this new force. And this ends up being the end of Knox and Washington's friendship. Like, they will not write to each other again. Washington didn't live too much longer after this, but they never reconciled. And so, at this point, Knox is getting into his 50s. He goes temporarily back into public life. He represents his area in Maine in the Massachusetts State Assembly, but he ends up losing his seat to a local blacksmith. He ends up being named as a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1805. But that's really all. Like, mostly he's just dealing with his own personal affairs until October 1806. While eating, he swallowed a chicken bone, which became lodged in his throat, which caused a fatal infection, and he died on October 25th, 1806, at the age of 56.
The chicken took him down.
Yeah, he was killed by a chicken.
The chicken took him down.
Wow.
So the British Army couldn't, the French couldn't, but a chicken.
What a chicken!
Yeah.
So
Wow.
we've come across in our podcast a couple of instances where someone dies like that, and it always just throws me slightly.
Yeah, it's just something so simple.
Hang on, a chicken. How do you swallow a chicken bone? I mean, I eat chicken fairly regularly.
My grandma almost choked on a chicken bone.
Well, obviously, yeah, it's possible because people do it, but I don't. How do you do it?
I would ask my grandma, but she died.
Chicken bone?
No, not chicken bone.
Okay. We'll leave that potentially horrific conversation.
No, it's just Alzheimer's and old age.
Right, okay.
Sorry, Betty.
The chicken didn't get her.
No.
But unfortunately, Knox, the chicken bone, and that's the thing. It's like I'm like you, Rob. It's like, how does this happen? And should I really be worried about this?
Because I was eating yesterday. I was eating
a chicken bone.
I chicken bone soup. A half a roast chicken I ate yesterday.
Wow,
it was very nice. Enjoyed my half a roast chicken. But at no point did I fear that one of those bones would end up inside me because I ate the chicken off the bone. But obviously it happens.
Because chicken bones get quite soft when you're cooking them, though, don't they? It's not like beef bone; they're bigger.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Like a fish bone. So I guess you could. I don't know if you ate the wrong thing.
But you say he didn't choke to death. It caused an infection.
It caused an infection. Yeah,
maybe his throat then, or esophagus.
Oh, nasty!
Oof. Not a good way to go.
No.
He was buried on his estate in Maine with full military honors. His wife, Lucy, actually lived on for nearly 2 more decades. Unfortunately, when he passed away, his finances were still pretty shaky. So she spent the rest of her life trying to get things in order, pay off his creditors, and she ended up having to sell portions of the family property. The house in Maine that he built, Montpelier, was actually demolished in 1871. But in the 20th century, a group actually got together and did a reconstruction not far from the site of the original house. And nice. I've actually been to the reconstructed Montpelier, and it's really cool.
Nice.
It's really interesting. But that is the life of Henry Knox.
It's good. That's a good life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now we get to the portion where we are going to rank him. So starting with the first category is the whole picture. And so in this round looks at his overall career and character. And so each of us can rank him up to 10 points. And we'll see how he goes. So in terms of kind of his overall career and character, Rob and Jamie, what do you think of Mr. Knox?
You see, always hard doing the first one, isn't it? It really is. Jamie, I think you're in a better position to jump in here because you're used to doing this. I usually have half an idea before getting to this stage.
I can make it up on the spot.
Yeah.
I think I'm looking in terms of whole picture. What did he do for the US? Well, he led the military the idea of there being a singular military. He tried to at least. Well, it certainly felt like he was trying to support the native cultures that were there at the time rather than just railroad. And he wanted this idea of like a unified country. That's what it felt like. It's like, no, we're a country. We can do this. Don't be scared of having this.
Mm-hmm.
You do get the impression he's one of those rare breeds in history where you've got essentially a stereotypical academic figure who also is very hands-on and practical, which obviously exists, but you tend not to see them in stereotypes so often. So it's refreshing to see someone like that. I think so just to be clear, this round is his personality and what he has achieved in his life, not worrying about political stuff. Is that
exactly?
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. This is more, his overall kind of statesmanship.
In which case, I think he'd be very pleased with himself.
Yeah.
I think if the young version of him working in the bookshop found out exactly where he ended up, and what he achieved. He'd look back and he'd nod knowingly at that young boy in the bookshop. Jamie's doing something.
It's my score.
Oh, you're already doing a score. You're holding up fingers. Yeah, you get the impression that he, like Jamie said, he worked to try and unify things and create this new country. Knowing what I know of the time period, a lot of people were not necessarily doing that. So, yeah.
It's quite modernist in some ways. That's why I'd be happy giving him an 8 from me.
Oh, you're going for 8.
For 8.
That's an 8 for Jamie. How about you, Rob?
I'm not going to go quite so high, just because I also vaguely know the other people you're going to be covering. And I want to leave a little bit of room. But, I mean, essentially establishing the War Department is huge. I'm going to go 7.
And so since there are 2 of you, basically I will take your 2 scores and add them, divide by 2. And so a total from y'all of 7.5. And I think I am going to join Rob in the 7. I think that he really does, in his overall career and what he was able to achieve, I think that it was critical. I think that he provided leadership. I think he provided a path forward that, was very important to highlight. And to your point, I think that he was also, he wouldn't be what we consider in terms of 21st century ethics completely there, but he did at least see he had concerns about Native peoples and the impact that the United States was having on them and this, and settlement.
For the time, that's what you want to see.
Yes.
No one person can completely change what's happening. What you need is many people holding that kind of view, and he was one person holding that kind of view that potentially might make things better in the future. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So now to our next round, the go-getter. And this round really focuses on his impact as a cabinet member. What we think about his role in that Secretary of War position and really thinking of, once the cabinet is formed and his role in Washington's administration.
You see, this is an interesting one because it kind of depends on what viewpoint you take. Mm-hmm. I'd say the average modern American would say, yes, he did a really good job pushing ideals through that eventually won out. But I could also fully understand why people at the time would be very nervous around the direction he was taking things. Mm-hmm. And I can see where they're coming from as well. So you've got that. But you can't deny that he was effective at what he did for a majority of the time. It's interesting towards the end where he just went, no, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And how much do we take that way away? Do we take points away from that?
I don't think so. I think it's just like self-awareness. It's like, I don't think I can do this anymore. It's like the powers that be, it's out of my control because people will fight for things when it's futile and make things worse. Personally.
Yeah. I mean, again, huge first Secretary of War, starting a trend, like really embedding things that will become so important in the future. Yeah. But that's essentially what this spin-off series is going to be about. Everyone's going to be starting something new, aren't they? The first ones are always so hard to read.
I think a healthy... I can't decide between 6 or 7. That's my view. I'm going for 7.
You're going for 7.
It gives a choice to twist it slightly.
The pacifist in me really wants to believe in in the view that was against him.
Yeah.
I'd love to believe that actually the standing army wasn't needed. It didn't need to grow. But the realist in me, it's like, no, they definitely needed to move away from the militias. It just wasn't sustainable. I think ultimately the country was stronger because he was there. 7.
So 14 is 7 as a total point for us.
Yeah.
And I am going to join both of you in that 7. So 14 points there. And I definitely, and that's the thing that is fascinating to me about Knox is that in traditional accounts of Washington's cabinet, it really focuses more on Jefferson and Hamilton, but you really get a sense when you start looking into what Knox was doing at the War Department, how much of a crucial role he played in the administration, and how closely he worked with Washington to craft policy, to get things going, to really create these institutions. And so he really is impactful in that role, I think more so than he typically gets credit for.
Yeah, things that are there today and the whole world is seeing. So,
exactly, the crucial role that he played in starting the Navy, of getting a professional army going, West Point, even though he didn't, he wasn't responsible for West Point. It was his vision and him just continuing to push for these things.
That becomes so important later on.
Yes,
it really does. I'm happy with that score.
So now we get to talk about the hot seat, which is, this is where we start to look at kind of his disgraceful behavior, actions that he committed. It doesn't necessarily have to be in his tenure of office in the cabinet, but just, any kind of disgrace that he had. And I think here is where we have the conversation about, what the policies that the War Department were really involved with, the impact that they had on Native peoples.
Quick question before we start is this minus numbers? Do these detract?
It is minus numbers.
Yes, because in our Roman series, these are positive numbers, which is quite strange comparing the two. But in our American series, it's minus. So
time is a great forgiver, isn't it?
It really is.
What have you got?
I'd forgotten how much fun the early episodes were during this round where you just go, oh, that's really bad. Come on, Jerry, give us some direction here.
So, and it really gets to, and this is the struggle that, we have looking back on these times, having the knowledge of where all this ends up. I think that he, for the time, was much more well-intentioned, and he did see that there were problems that most people of the time didn't. They didn't think about these things. But also, I think, we can't ignore that these policies that he helped put in place continued the problem, continued to force Native peoples off their lands. And the fact that some of the agents of the War Department, when doing these negotiations, were, they would use any means that they could, whether it was, let's bring liquor, let's get whoever will sign a piece of paper or put an X on it. Let's do whatever we need to in order to get that land. I think that we do have to take off a couple of points for that.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that. From what you've covered today, it does sound like he was one of the time's thinkers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who didn't blindly just... What am I trying to say?
Follow the racist trend that was going on.
Yeah, exactly. It is so easy to fall into the trap of saying everyone back then was racist, so therefore it's fine. Because, yes, lots of people were racist back then. Lots of people are racist now. It doesn't make it fine either back then or now. And people's perceptions of racism change over time, and everyone appears more racist back then than they do now. Although, to be honest, not as much as I'd argue. I'd argue not as much as some people think. Sorry, I'm rambling now. It definitely could be worse. That's what I'm going to say.
I think he tried to mediate a dodgy situation, didn't he?
There is also nothing else that stands out in his life. There are no other big scandals. He doesn't... I'm trying to think of many of the other scandals we've come across in the American series, but there are many things you can do in your life where in this round you'd go, ooh, you shouldn't have done that. He seems fairly a straight lace, apart from, could we argue, the fact that he just abandoned his duty during the whiskey rebellion. I mean, that's another area where we can start picking up points, potentially. I'm going to go a base level of -2 for just underlying nastiness that's happening in the time, but I'm going to put another point on for the fact that he essentially abandoned his post. So -3.
I was going to put on -2 because I thought that summed up quite well. So 2.5.
So that's -2.5, and I am going to go with a -2 as well. I think that despite his well intentions, and part of me wonders, in his awareness, did he see with some of what was going on? He kind of saw where this was heading. And I think he did try and do all that he could, but ultimately it still happened. Ultimately, we still had we had the Battle of Fallen Timbers, we had the Treaty of Greenville. There was still this push towards westward expansion.
Yeah, and you can't be in charge of the War Department and such things happen under you and not take some of the flak for that.
Of course.
Exactly.
So I definitely think some points need to be taken off.
And likewise with the Whiskey Rebellion, it really does come to, okay, if you were done with your post and tired, ready to go ahead and say that sooner rather than just not show up when the president calls and says, I need you back.
Yep.
No, I'm just going to take some time to do my own thing.
Put you on the spot here, and I might be wrong because I'm half remembering something. That is the only time in American history where a president led troops in battle. Well, towards battle. No battle took place. Is that because Knox wasn't around that Washington felt he had to step up, or do you think he would have been there anyway?
I think he would have been there anyway. It was really, and that's the thing. And again, thinking of this, how people saw George Washington, he was the rallying figure, and Washington knew if he showed up in Western Pennsylvania, it would really make folks think twice.
Yeah.
Are you really going to oppose George Washington? But he wanted Knox to be there by his side.
Which makes sense.
And he wasn't there. So that gets us a negative 4.5. So we're taking those points off. And now we get to the tenure of office. And basically, this is just the time that he was in the cabinet. Now, with Knox, there is this interesting, because he was the secretary at war in the Confederation government. But since this is focused on the cabinet and his tenure during the presidency, I'm not counting that towards his tenure of office, because that was, it was a different role. It was a different government. So in terms of his tenure, so he was Secretary of War from September 12th, 1789 to December 31st, 1794. So that rounds out to around 5 years. And now we do have 3 bonus categories. The first bonus is if the cabinet member held more than one post in the cabinet. The second bonus is if they served in more than one administration. And the third is if the cabinet member became president. None of those apply to Knox.
No.
They're good bonus points, though. I like those as bonus rounds. But no, Knox gets none.
He gets none. And so that brings us to a grand total of 29 points for Henry Knox. Now we have to ask ourselves the question, thinking of everything that we've discussed and everything that we've talked about with Knox's life, do you think that this cabinet member is notable enough or impactful enough to earn a seat at the table of the Cabinet All-Stars?
Yes.
Well, I'm just going to point out how many other street fighting gang members who are studying advanced mathematics are there. I mean, you've got it's very well rounded with Knox. He clearly knows how to get around a battlefield, but he also knows the books. It's I'm happy for him to be there.
But also, he pushed change that model a lot of modern American policies and politics now. I mean, he was a precursor to everything. Well, not everything, but a chunk of your tax dollars.
I will say that Knox's and Hamilton's vision of the future certainly won out in the end.
Yeah.
How much that is a direct impact of them is more debatable, because a lot happened in between now and then, as we've covered in our podcast. But I definitely think Knox would be happy if he woke up in today's society and saw what had happened with the country. I think he'd be pleased. I think he did. I think he did a good job. You can certainly do worse for your first war secretary. So, yeah, I'm going to say yes.
And I am in complete agreement. I think that in terms of his life, he's a fascinating character to discuss, and especially the intersection that he had with so much of American history during the Revolution, during the early Republic. I think that studying him and his life it really helps to give us an understanding of that time and to see his impact on that time. I think that he does earn his seat at the table. So Congratulations, Henry Knox. You have earned your seat at the table.
Woo! There we go. Got one.
And so with that, I'd like to thank Rob and Jamie again for being here on this episode of the special episode of the Presidencies of the United States. Highly recommend you checking out Totalis Rankium, both the American President series and the Roman Emperors. There is so much in history that is just fascinating, scary, interesting to look at. And
it really is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Some of it's funny as well, which is what we're here for.
All the deaths.
There is much to laugh about.
There is.
Highly recommend it. Thank you so much, guys. And with that, I will say goodbye.
Okay. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye. Sirs, I have terrible news.
What news you bring, sir?
I've just come from Knox's dining room. He is dead.
Dead?
Dead!
How did he die?
I have no idea, but in his hand, he was eating a prawn sandwich.
Prawn sandwich?
Yes.
Do you think he choked on the prawn sandwich?
Oh dear God, I hope not.
I mean, that's embarrassing.
It really is.
Well, wasn't he the guy who shot off his own fingers?
He did shoot off his own fingers.
I mean, his embarrassment has followed him throughout his entire life, to be fair.
But we can't let this stand.
No.
We must become the handkerchief over his death.
That covers the eyes of misery and shame.
We must talk up his death.
What's a more honorable way for him to have died?
Obviously, glorious battle against our enemies.
But we're not fighting anybody right now.
Damn it.
That's a problem.
How about, maybe he choked on something different?
During a glorious battle?
There's no battles, you just said that.
Fine. What's the most manly thing to choke on? Are you thinking like a cow's thigh bone?
Well, that's too big. Maybe a tin of soup.
But how would he choke on a tin of soup? No, it's got to be something. We've got to have something, some kind of animal. What do we usually eat?
Black bear!
Well, yes, we do eat black bear, but that's just because one died outside the hut.
They eat us more than we eat them, to be fair. Yes.
We need something that it's big enough not to seem pathetic, but small enough that you could feasibly choke on it.
Salmon?
Salmon could work.
No, I don't think salmon.
It's a bit too fishy.
A bit too classy.
We need good manly meat. That's what we need. Manly meat. Come on. What did you eat yesterday?
I had black bear.
Oh, of course we did. We all ate black bear.
I had a dead one on the road.
Chicken.
No.
Chicken works. I had a cousin once died from a chicken.
Yeah, but he was pecked to death.
Yes, but they will do.
What are you thinking?
I think chicken could work. I mean, everybody knows how vicious chickens are.
That's true.
If Henry Knox was going to be taken down, by damn, he was going to be taken down by a chicken.
Not just any chicken.
A Florentine varimismal.
Oh.
The most aggressive all chickens.
They're so aggressive. Yes, no, that's the kind of thing that would take Knoxy down.
Yes.
Here's to Henry Knox, taken down by a chicken.
Hello, this is Gary Chahot welcoming you to check out the French History Podcast. Our main show covers the history of France from the first humans until present. If you liked Mike Duncan's The History of Rome and wanted a similar program covering the land of beauty, culture, and love, we are exactly that. We also host world-renowned scholars who have delivered guest episodes on their specialties, including 18th century pirates, revolutionary booksellers in 20th century Paris, the special friendship between the Marquis de Lafayette and Thomas Jefferson, and numerous others. Learn what you love and listen to the French History Podcast today.